At 5:40 in the evening on July 1st, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt picked up the telephone in his headquarters at Zanjger-Oni, a grand chateau just west of Paris that had once belonged to French royalty. The evening light filtered through tall windows onto maps covered with red and blue markings showing the disposition of forces across Normandy. On the other end of the line was Field Marshal Wilhelm Hitler, chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, calling from the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's fortified headquarters in East Prussia, over 1,000 miles away. Hitler wanted to know the situation in Normandy. Von Rundstedt, a veteran of 50 years of service and a master of operational planning, described the grim reality. The Americans had captured Cherbourg, the British were moving toward Caen, and German casualties were mounting. Replacement troops were scarce, Luftwaffe could not contest the skies, and the front was crumbling, slowly but steadily. Hitler's persistent demand was simple. What should we do? Von Rundstedt, speaking with a clarity earned through decades of experience, said, "End the war, you idiots. What else can you do?" Silence followed. Truth, he knew, was often unwelcome at the highest levels. Within days, von Rundstedt would be relieved of command, replaced by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, a capable officer with no better chance to reverse Germany's fate. Von Rundstedt's career had been one of discipline and precision. Born into a military family on December 12, 1875, he had risen through the ranks, serving in World War I in staff positions, mastering logistics, coordination, and operational planning. By the time Hitler came to power, von Rundstedt was already a senior general, loyal to the German state but skeptical of Nazi ideology. When D-Day approached, von Rundstedt faced an impossible task, defending the Atlantic coast from Norway to Spain with divisions that were under strength, poorly equipped, or composed of older men and conscripts from occupied territories. The Panzer divisions he commanded were critical reserves, and he argued for holding them inland to launch decisive counterattacks. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, by contrast, argued for stationing them at the coast to repel the invasion immediately, aware of Allied air and naval power. Hitler, as was typical, made the worst possible compromise. He kept key Panzer divisions under his direct control, removing flexibility from commanders on the ground. When D-Day arrived, the Allies landed across 5 beaches, supported by 11,000 aircraft and nearly 7,000 ships. Von Rundstedt requested the release of Panzer reserves immediately, but Hitler's delay, compounded by Allied deception operations, fortitude, left the German armored forces immobilized. Hours were lost. The beachheads solidified. By evening, the first Panzer counterattacks were attempted, but they were piecemeal and insufficient. Von Rundstedt watched in despair as the window for a decisive action closed. Allied forces were consolidating, bringing in reinforcements and supplies, while German responses were hampered by rigid command structures, destroyed rail networks, and relentless air attacks. The hours after D-Day confirmed von Rundstedt's deepest fears. The Allies were not being pushed back. German counterattacks, delayed and fragmented, were unable to dislodge the beachheads. When the 12th SS Panzer Division finally arrived, it struck hard but in isolation, causing casualties but failing to change the overall situation. Supplies, reinforcements, and communications flowed steadily to the Allies, while German forces struggled under constant air attacks and disrupted logistics. Von Rundstedt observed day by day the widening gap between what the front required and what orders allowed. He had spent his life understanding the battlefield, predicting enemy movements, and calculating probabilities of success. Yet the most critical decisions were being made hundreds of miles away by a leader who refused to visit the front, relying instead on colored pins on maps and outdated reports. By July 1st, 1944, during a critical phone call with Hitler, von Rundstedt's assessment was simple and blunt. The war in the West was lost. Continuing to fight would only determine the scale of Germany's destruction. For his honesty, he was relieved of command shortly afterward. Hitler replaced him with officers no more capable of reversing the inevitable. The war dragged on for another 10 months, exacting a heavy toll on soldiers and civilians alike, culminating in the destruction of German cities and the Red Army's advance to Berlin. Von Rundstedt's insight revealed a timeless truth. Those closest to the problem often see it most clearly, yet those with the power to act may ignore it, often with catastrophic consequences. Military organizations, and indeed any large hierarchy, fail when honesty is punished and initiative is stifled. Von Rundstedt had studied war his entire life, commanded with skill across decades, and understood the mathematics of victory and defeat. Yet in a system dominated by ideology and rigid hierarchy, even the most competent voices were silenced. His retirement was a quiet one. He watched as the outcomes he had foreseen unfolded exactly as predicted. Allied forces expanded their beachheads, captured critical ports, and advanced inland. Germany's strategic position deteriorated relentlessly. Von Rundstedt's story, while rooted in the events of 1944, demonstrates a universal lesson. Effective leadership requires listening to those who see reality clearly, acting decisively, and recognizing that delays, indecision, and rigid control can turn even the most competent army into a defeated one. In the end, von Rundstedt remained a soldier of principle and experience. He never sought fame or recognition beyond his duty. His life, from the cadet of 1892 to the Field Marshal of 1944, was defined by service, foresight, and the courage to speak truth to power, even when the cost was his command. And history, as it so often does, bore out his assessment. Honesty and expertise ignored can shape outcomes far more than valor or ideology alone.